everyone, welcome to The 7/8ths, a podcast to share stories on failures and rejections. There may not be any fairy tale endings in this podcast. My guests aren't past the mountain of struggle. In fact, some of them might still be in it. I hope this podcast serves as a forum for friends and acquaintances to exchange tales of defeat. Defeat that make the 7/8ths part of our lives. You know, like the part of the iceberg that you can see. By sharing these stories, I hope we can all normalize failures and hence win over that fear of defeat. Because failing is just a part of living. I hope you will relate. Do leave me a note of feedback, and critique is welcome as well. You can find me on Twitter @FamNectar. Now, on to our episode. Welcome to episode 18 of The 7/8ths. In this episode, I sit down with David Fano, founder and CEO of Teal, for a conversation. David Fano is a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience building products and services. As the founder and CEO of his latest venture, Teal, Dave is focused on building technology tools that can empower people to grow their careers. In just under 1 year, Teal has grown to be loved and used by over 20,000 users to power boost their careers. Prior to Teal, Dave co-founded Case, a technology consulting firm, while serving as an adjunct faculty at Columbia's Graduate School of Architecture. Case worked with clients such as Google, Disney, Apple, and then went on to be the first acquisition made by WeWork in 2015. At WeWork, Dave held several executive roles and eventually became the Chief Growth Officer. In a span of just 4 years, Dave built and led a global growth team that transacted over 2 million square feet of space per month. In this episode, Dave talks about his journey from humble beginnings to Case and then to WeWork to now founding and managing Teal. Dave is raw and real about pivoting from his first startup, the turmoil with transition from Case to WeWork, his struggles with his identity as he walked away from the role that almost defined him. He's honest and says it as it was. It's time for us to pull up a chair, sit down, and just listen in. So how are you?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. How is Teal going?
It's going great. You know, we recently made a switch from, trying to have like a freemium type model to just 100% free. And I think it's much better for what we're trying to do. You know, we're growing at a really good clip. We're helping a lot of people. Engagement's really good. And we have some really exciting ideas for monetization that we think are a win-win-win. So yeah, it's really going awesome.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. And going free is actually quite noble, but the cost you're trying to work through is also really meaningful, helpful, and very relevant for any time, actually, especially for this past year and a half, where all of us have seen kind of ups and downs. So I really appreciate the great work that you and your team at Teal is doing.
We love the work. You know, it's one of these things that in another world probably is a nonprofit.
You do come across like that sometimes in your emails and in your communications, even in the sessions that you host. It does definitely come across as you are really doing this because you and your team are meaning to be helpful. It does not come across very salesy and, hey, sign up for this and sign up for that at all.
So that's the goal, and that's what we're trying to do. But, I've said it from the very beginning, we want to do good first and do well. So we want to show that a company can do good and make money. So yeah, that's what we are. And we have amazing investors that support us on that belief, and we're seeing it. And I think we're also at the right time where people are having a higher sense of agency and sense of wanting of control of their career. So I really feel like we're in the right place at the right time. People are used to using tooling to manage parts of their life. So all the stars are aligning. So can't complain.
That's great. So for me personally, the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast is you do one startup after the next. And by definition, right, startup journeys are the most painful, but can also be most rewarding. And as you know, on the 7/8ths, my hope is to really share the stories of struggles and setbacks and rejections
that don't come across and don't come through easily on social media feeds. And even in conversations with friends, we always seem to focus on the 1/8, akin to sort of what is visible in a part of an iceberg. But most part of our journey is in the bottom part of the iceberg, that it isn't visible, all the invisible work that goes behind the scenes. So you seemed like a great guest to have on the show and to talk about your journey from case through WeWork and your setbacks and how you managed through it. So thank you for agreeing to be on the 7/8ths.
Yeah, awesome. My career journey is not short of failures. So I'm more than happy to talk about them. It comes from a place of privilege, frankly, because the world doesn't want you to do it. The world rewards confidence. It doesn't reward vulnerability. And I think that, showing the world that you lack confidence or that you're questioning yourself, as much as people say they applaud it, at the end of the day, if you're going to raise money, if you're looking to get hired, they want someone who is very confident they're going to succeed and not someone who's so it's hard, and I'm not in any way trying to pat myself on the back for doing this. I think I have an extra permission because I'm a white guy in a world that rewards white guys and have had the sort of benefits of doing that. So I kind of get to do it, but I don't want any sort of special applause for doing it. I think I'm in a place that I can, and I wish more people could, but I understand why they don't.
Wow, that's really nice of you to say. I wanted to kind of start off with how you grew up and what was sort of your first experience with failures. Are you the big one that you remember?
I am the son of an immigrant. My father came from Cuba, from exile in 1961, where his family was in a fairly good place, and moving to Miami and having nothing. And my grandmother peeled shrimp in a shrimp factory. My dad put cardboard in the soles of his shoes because they were being worn through as he walked to school. And so I grew up with a very strong work ethic in my family. My mother was born and raised in Miami, Jewish background. I was born and raised in Little Havana, where my father was building his business. He was not a very studious person. I think he barely made it through high school, did like a year or two of community college, and then dropped out and started working. And very quickly started his own company. And I grew up working with him at his company. I would go on the weekends to job sites. I'd be sweeping job sites. We would drive the job sites on the weekends. We eventually built our own house. I got to see that. He just worked hard. He got home every day at 9:00 at night. He left every day at 6 a.m., even when he was having quite an amount of success. So that was instilled in me in an early age. And it's just what we talked about. Like, you got home for dinner. It's like, hey, what are you working on? It's not, how did you do at school? We didn't talk about grades. We didn't talk about any of those things. And I'd say, if I had to think through a moment in my life, I did not do well in school. I was the art kid. I wanted to draw and make paintings and be a comic book artist. I eventually went to undergrad and I liked it, and I started to do okay once I was there. And I told my dad, hey, I'm going to apply to graduate school at Columbia. And he basically laughed. He was just
so interesting.
He's like, they're not going to take you. And it wasn't a personal offense. I just think that that's what's driven him. I think he's always been like, I'm going to assume the worst. And if it happens, awesome. And I'm going to work my tail off to make it happen. But I wasn't really ready to process that at the time in the way that I am now. And having kids, and there I was like, you know what? I'm going to prove this guy wrong. Like, even the people that are supposed to believe in you the most, even though he might have, that's just not kind of like how he verbalized it. And for him, he didn't even know what that meant, honestly. A school like Columbia, Ivy League, those are foreign concepts to him. Yeah, it's just not something he's sort of been on top of. So, just the idea of leaving Miami to go to school was kind of like, who does that? And then luckily I got in, and that was incredibly hard 3 years of my life, but incredibly rewarding. But I'd say that's the one, like, when you ask that question, I'm like, yeah, that was a pretty, defeating moment.
I wonder if some element of it is still there in you, driving you whenever people question your ability to do something.
Absolutely. We're all going to have detractors in our life. And I definitely have a sense of imposter syndrome. I've had it somehow or another. I found myself always being like the youngest person around the table. And that's always gotten under my skin. When I was in high school, I was a manager in a grocery store. And people that worked for me were 5-10 years my senior. I was 16 years old and I was a manager. And it was awkward. And I had to like tell people, their workload and manage things and, order inventory. Then I was a teaching assistant and there were students that were older than me, and then eventually at WeWork, I was the youngest executive on the exec team. The only person older than me was Adam Newman. Everyone else was 5, 10, 15 years older than me. And I always definitely like carried insecurities about that. I'm like, hey man, these people have so much more experience than me. Should I be here? Am I supposed to be here? Like, did I get lucky? What's going on? And so it's, now I'm 40 and I still feel that way, but it's like, but it's definitely been there.
First of all, I didn't expect to hear the words like imposter syndrome and insecurities coming into this conversation with you. Because when I see you from the outside, these are not the things that cross my mind as some of the experiences that you will be going through personally. So how did you not let those emotions come through when you're sitting across the table from someone that is definitely more experienced than you are and exuding, to your much earlier point, confidence, right?
It comes through two ways. I mean, I think one of the challenges for me in those settings is I'm quite vocal about my doubts. And sometimes I think that doesn't really serve me well. And I'll ask the dumb question. I think what sort of pushes me is I do want to learn. I feel like the outcome is worse. It's like, all right, so I'll endure a little bit of personal discomfort, but on the other side of this, I'll have learned more. And that's something that my curiosity has been there since I was a little kid. And so that curiosity has always been there and somehow or another has like pushed through the insecurities, the doubts, because I want to know and I want to learn. That drives me past the sort of discomfort of putting myself out there.
So Columbia, and you struggled almost 3 years through Columbia, and was Case right after that? What was your first startup? Did you go right into startups?
So, I mean, depends on how we want to define a startup, but I'd say like the first real business I had was in high school. I was selling paintings. I started making art and I would make these like large scale paintings. I came up with this sort of modernist pop style that worked for Miami. Probably sold 10, 15 paintings, made, I don't know, like $5,000.
That's impressive for a high school kid.
Yeah, that was probably like the first thing. I also bought and sold comic books. I'd sort of like buy 3 copies, keep one for myself, 2 would appreciate, and I'd sell them. So I'd say that was kind of like the earliest stuff. And then, I also sort of dabbled in making fake IDs in high school when I learned Photoshop. So things like that. Always kind of had a little bit of like a commercial bend. But then in college, I started like a web development firm with a really close friend of mine and made websites and, different things for different people, incorporating design and the technology I hadn't learned. Then through grad school, I did a lot of 3D visualization and freelancing. I took my skills there and started to offer a lot of services and was basically running a small business there, hiring friends to help me. So I'd say those were all kind of like entrepreneurial efforts. And then right after grad school, I went and worked at a really great architecture firm called Shop Architects, where I met my 2 close friends who eventually became my co-founders. And actually before becoming co-founders, I pitched Shop on starting these consulting businesses, and they kind of had different ideas and different thoughts and they went different routes. And so we spun out and did it on our own and started Case. And at the same time, actually, the main reason was we started another company at the time called Who By You, which was like a local search web app. And this was in 2007. And so that was our main impetus. We raised some money from friends and family, and then also started Case to basically pay ourselves salaries because those were services we could offer. So we started those both at the same time. After 3 years, we shut down Who By You, paid back our investors, and kept going with Case.
And how was the journey with Case?
It was awesome. It was this really interesting moment when we shut down Who By You because we were kind of splitting ourselves in two, focused on this startup, which is really what we thought would be big. And then Case was supposed to be just this kind of thing that bought us time until this tech startup got huge.
Oh, that's interesting.
Lo and behold, the thing we knew how to do did well, and the thing we didn't do so well. And so we ultimately ended up shutting that down and acquiring it and brought that team on board. And from that moment forward, like Case really started to take off because we got clear on that was what we did 100%. And we learned a lot. We grew an incredible team. We were able to sort of build a culture that we were excited about. We had all experienced things that we didn't want in a corporate culture. Maybe we didn't know exactly what we wanted, but we learned along the way we were able to do some really cool, fun things. We were about half remote, half local. We learned the troubles in that.
This was pre-2010, right?
We started Case in 2008.
Yeah.
And then sold it to WeWork in 2015.
Mm-hmm. So you were already doing half remote, half
Yeah, we had people all over the world. And we just said, we were in a very niche space. And we said, look, we're not going to limit ourselves geographically to the best talent for our category of topic. So, and we had built a global network between, I was very active on Twitter at the time. We had built a blog where people were learning a lot of the techniques that we were helping people with. And so we had built a bit of a following. So, we were kind of big fish in a very small pond. But, we were able to build a good audience, and we figured out how to do that, how to hire people, what was the infrastructure. A lot of credit to Fed and Steve for making all that happen. But we really had an awesome, very cohesive culture.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what was the emotion when you had to shut down the startup that you were betting on and then pivot to the startup that wasn't your main horse, so to speak?
It was tricky. We had tried a couple different things. We actually brought someone in to run it. We came up with another really cool technology, kind of leveraging the stack and trying something different, but it just wasn't really working. And, I'd say at first it sort of stung a little bit, mainly from pride, to admit that kind of failure, that it didn't work. But then after, it was almost like, shedding a huge drain and like resistance and needing to be able to do both of those things at the same time. And it just gave us clarity of like the fog was lifted, that now we knew that we were going to focus on one thing and do that thing really well. I mean, Case did a lot of things, but it felt really right after we sort of swallowed that pill that, we did. And it really helped that we were able to pay back our investors because it was mostly friends and family. We were just such a high integrity team, and they're such incredible people. And coming to that realization, and we probably let it go too long. We probably should have come to that sooner, because we also poured a bunch of Case's money into, supporting that team and keeping that going beyond the investors. But after it, I feel like most hard things, after you're able to, and especially like a recognition of failures and just tough decisions made after the fact, you're able to look at it and say, all right, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you had sort of absorbed the decision to go all into Case, how was it building Case from that point on? Because it would have felt different, right?
It felt more deliberate and more focused. What we did is the three of us as partners in the firm got very clear on our responsibilities. We said, hey, now that we're all doing this 100%, some of us were spending more time on Who By You, like me, versus more on Case. Said, let's get role clarity. We even gave ourselves proper titles. I think a lot of things that people do in companies of that size say, look, as partners, we all do everything, because there's parts that suck and there's parts that are great. So let's divvy those out so we all get like equal parts suck and equal parts fun. But the funny thing is that some parts that suck for one person are fun for the other. So as an example, I enjoyed sales. I didn't enjoy the closing of the deals, but I enjoyed the initial meeting, the pitch. I enjoyed it, and I was okay at it, where Fed and Steve didn't really enjoy that part very much. But as partners, the expectation was that we all had to go do that. And when we actually had those tough conversations, or at least what we thought would be, they actually became these very clarifying, relieving conversations. It's like, oh, that's so good, because I really don't like doing that. And it's like, oh, that's awesome, because I like doing that. It was just like kind of in our heads that that's what we were supposed to do. And we were trying to be like sort of fair and egalitarian about it. But by powering through those conversations, the outcome was better. And you just like, the growth of the company really changed after that time.
Yeah. Yeah. What were some of the struggles pre-acquisition by WeWork as you were building Case? Was that an outcome that you were working towards, or you were not looking for an acquisition style exit?
A number of times in company meetings, I would tell our team, we will never be acquired. People don't acquire service firms. We have no ambitions to be acquired. Service firms don't have valuations. We never in our wildest dreams thought we'd be acquired. And so it wasn't something we were pursuing. It wasn't even something we actively worked on. So no, was not part of our plan. We were just going to keep growing it. Maybe this is one area where we had slight like differences of opinion of like how much we wanted to grow it and how big we wanted to make it. Steve in particular had this idea of like 100 people was like max. It's like once a company crosses 100 people, it's just harder. It's not better or worse. It's just different. It's not what he wanted. He wanted to be able to know everybody's name, like keep it tight, like raise rates, do other things, but just don't get big for the sake of big. And that happens with consulting firms. I wanted us to be big, make a lot of money, have a lot of impact, was less concerned with headcount, and Fed was sort of indifferent. That was one, but we did want to keep growing. We did want to start having like product revenue, just not consulting revenue. So just getting acquired was not one of those things on our roadmap.
So how was that experience of getting acquired by WeWork?
It was interesting. It happened very quickly. Well, sort of. It was like long and then fast. They had been proposing to acquire us for, let's say, a year or two, but it was never serious. It was kind of like, what if, how about, let's think about, but we never like put numbers on the table or never really talked through it because we were dismissive of it like fairly quickly. But then they came with like a real proposal, the real roles for us. And at that point, I think they had a better understanding of who we were, what we did, what our value could be. I think they had a better understanding of our value than us. So that then the process went relatively quickly from, a bit of like a very fast courting process to then like a handshake and then trying to wrap up the deal. I think the whole thing from first conversation to closing was definitely under 4 weeks. It might've been like 3.
Wow. That's really, really fast. That's really fast. Do you remember what your emotional journey was?
So I'd say there's like kind of 2 parts of it. There was like the practical and the emotional. I think ultimately why we chose to do it is because we saw it as a continuation of the mission at Case. We wanted to have a huge impact on the building industry. We knew it was an industry that was slow, stodgy, lacked innovation, no real kind of like intrinsic motivations to change it. It actually largely benefited from the inefficiencies. And we said, like, as a consultant, we're the least equipped to do it. If we can go in on what we would call the owner side, the folks with the buying power, we could actually make an impact. We could award the contracts. We can prescribe process. We can require technologies and innovations. So that part was very exciting for us once we got there, and we sort of believed that we'd be given the opportunities to do those things, which we were in the end. And then there was just like the practical of like, okay, this is our company. We have full control. Now we're going to like go be employees from this other thing where we just don't know what's going to happen. And we sort of had to work through those things. But once we decided to do it, there was no like seller's remorse. We were very excited about, so we had a good sense of who we were working with, what was on the other side. I'd say the hardest part was our team's reaction to it and our wanting to share with our team what was happening, but we couldn't, just because it could have just as easily fallen through. And if we felt out of control, our team would have felt even more out of control because it wasn't their place to decide. And so that's always this like tricky tension where like, when do you share? How much do you want to share? Does it really behoove people to know? Is it our place to decide that they can't know? It's hard. There's no simple answer. And no matter how good your culture is, you've got multiple people and everyone's going to take to the information in a different way. And so that was, I'd say, one of the harder parts in the process was kind of holding back that information, who to share it with, how to get people excited in the same way we were, and kind of like the emotional journey we had gone through. And we're like, all right, cool, we're doing this, to then like getting everyone to go through that journey. And then like us needing to kind of like regress in that journey and be empathetic to kind of bring them along. Those were tough.
Yeah. And it sounds like it happened very quickly too. So there's not enough of time to actually process the emotion yourself before turning around and helping your teams manage through their emotions there, right?
Totally. Because there was these externalities that WeWork was about to raise another round of funding. And we really wanted to get the deal done before that. So there was this forcing function to make it happen fast. We could have said, hey, we'll make it happen after. It would have halved the value of the deal. So there was, and everyone at the company, was getting equity. Some of that equity was granted after. I don't want to be misleading about that. So there was pressures there to get it done by a certain time. I don't know how much would have changed. I definitely think that there were some things we would have handled better. But at the end of the day, I think we had enough time to handle those better. I think that was just an experience on our part that resulted in some of like the trip ups and the discomfort that it caused for our team. I think we could have done a better job managing that, but it was the first time we had ever gone through something like that. Doesn't make it okay, but definitely lots of learnings and, and sort of battle scars from that process.
Can you talk through a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the one that I've cited a few times is that, comes most clearly to my memory is that we did not have employment agreements.
At Case, you didn't have employee agreements.
Mostly because we didn't know that like we had to have them. Had is a relative term, but it is a good practice. So we went from 0 employment agreements to like, look, you do what you want, when you want, however you want, to very quickly needing everybody to sign one, because WeWork as a venture funded company, just out of pure risk management, had to have them, right? All those things create liabilities to the company, so you got to tighten those up. And what would have just been like, okay, cool, we'll use your employment agreements for now, and then like eventually we'll transfer you guys over to ours, became, oh, you don't have anything? Well, you need to sign ours, which was, the employment agreement of a big, at that point, 500-600 person company with legal departments. So from 0 to that was quite intense. And then to top it off, we asked everybody to sign them in 24 hours.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, which was a huge mistake. Yeah, huge mistake.
Very stressful.
A document that says like, look, any IP that you've produced belongs to us. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. All like fairly standard terms. But, to be forced to sign that in 24 hours and really kind of like a moment of no leverage either. Because like in a typical employment process, you might be able to say, hey, look, I'm walking away, I'm going to negotiate. It was kind of like, look, sign this or nothing. Like this deal needs to get done. We don't have time to like one-off, negotiate these things for 60 people. So it was really just like poorly executed on our part. We could have presented it. We could have talked about it. I think we just like sent an email. It's like, hey, here's an employment agreement, sign it in 24 hours. That one, I think, was a huge mistake. Like people got very, very upset. We got text messages from longtime employees and incredible friends saying like, this isn't like you guys. Why are you doing this to us? This doesn't feel like our culture. And then we were able to kind of have a conversation with WeWork and say like, hey, look, we didn't process that this was really like an unrealistic demand and we need to walk this back. And then like WeWork was super understanding about it. They were just kind of like running through a process to get this thing done in 3 weeks. But that was a big one. And, we almost lost a lot of people. We probably did as a result of it. Just like it probably put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth post-acquisition, where some of them left fairly soon after.
Yeah. How was it after the acquisition was completed and you kind of became a part of WeWork?
It was a change. Their culture was different than our culture. That said, we were about 10% of the workforce when we came in. Company was 500-600 and we were 60 people. And we had influence in that sense, just like given the number of people we were. We had been working with a lot of them. I think that what immediately happened is, as much as we had been working with them, like a new sense of empathy came from going to the inside. And anyone that's ever been a consultant and like gone on the inside, even though you think you know everything that's going on, a whole new world opens up once you become inside to the company and you just understand internal mechanics, politics, just different things that you just weren't privy to before. Even just as simple as like having an email address the same as the company, going to all hands meetings, and all these things that are like very internal to the culture. And so I think there was a new sense of empathy and encouragement. And one of the things that was just kind of good timing that was within a couple months of the acquisition was WeWork Summer Camp, which wasn't for everybody. There's obviously been a lot documented on those events. But that was one of the years where it was like, but it was still not too big. This was 2015. And it was nice. Like it was a way to just like connect with people, not in a pure work setting. And I think most people like left was like, this is pretty cool to do this retreat and to like connect with people in a different way.
What were some of the pressures that you experienced, just teeing off of the thread that you had once you came onto the inside, right? You're no longer a consultant, but you still have a big portion of Case within you. and now you're a part of WeWork. What were some of the pressures that, if I can use this word, you had to succumb to?
So one was having a boss, right? I didn't, we had clients.
Yeah.
Now we were employees. My boss was Adam Newman. He was really good at pushing people to do more than they thought they could, which, I will always credit him with, because he just had this, incredible pursuit and ambition for just doing incredible things. And I think that's not a trait a lot of us have. And it's not like he didn't expect that of himself. And so I give him a lot of credit for that. And I don't think the company would have done the incredible things that it did without his push. Look, we were like modestly growing case, but not at a rate that, anyone was going to like sit there and be, overly impressed about. To then like have this external, like, no, you guys got to step on the gas. So that was like a new pressure of like, we didn't like to fail. Like we would set goals because we kind of knew we would hit them. They were like, a little hard. The goals at WeWork were like, wow, there's like a 50% chance we hit this. But even just like being comfortable with putting down such audacious goals, which for me was a huge learning. It's honestly, when you put a date down for a project, you will take all the time till that date. But if you move that date up like a week, you either cut out things you didn't need to do. And so it's like when you're given the time, you'll use it. And so that was just kind of like something that I'm not sure how calculated he was about it, but it was just kind of like embedded in how he worked. And that was not comfortable for us. But it was a huge shift for us. So I think it was a net positive, but it was a big transition for us.
Do you think the journey after becoming a part of WeWork was a failure or a success?
Oh, I think it was a massive success. All successes are made up of a series of failures. So
a series of failures. That's interesting. Mm-hmm.
Because, that's how we learn and that's how we iterate. And so overall, I think that we essentially like nounified office space. Like there was no brand in this space. There was no understanding. You had companies saying like, we want to WeWork our office, right? Like going into architecture firms and saying, that's what we want. And teams, integrated, vertical integration, massive, massive successes. If you look at relative to where we were, we drastically reduced our construction expenses while very impressively increasing our quality. But it's amazing. Kyle O'Keefe was building it with his bare hands.
Yeah.
But, we were able to maintain and decrease costs while exponentially increasing quality. I don't think our process or our product were ever the things that hurt WeWork and hurt the narrative. I think those became more about, sort of financial things and markets. And I think it was a series of unfortunate events and timing. But I think overall, and I think WeWork's going to be a company that stands the test of time. I think it's a product people need. I think
absolutely.
Real estate is fundamentally broken. And so I see our time and our impact at WeWork as a massive success.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think was the hard part then as you were exiting WeWork?
Leaving the people. I think I built some incredible relationships and the work. I love the work we were doing. Like every day I was being challenged with, problems that I had never seen before. We're opening 2 million square feet a month, but part of my remit was to also make sure that they got filled and we had customers. And so working with incredible people like Granite Jambalaj and Nick Warswick, and Fed to think about how we were going to deliver this space, but not only just deliver it, also make sure that it was occupied. And so really flipping the whole model on its head was a lot of fun, and it required a tremendous amount of orchestration and, collaboration. That was really hard, and I really enjoyed it. And we were achieving really incredible things. And so that adrenaline rush of that growth and the successes was a lot of fun. That's addictive, but stepping away from that was hard, and understanding that, it's just like it wasn't really my time to do that anymore. The company was reaching a scale where we had to do things that, I didn't agree with. Not that they were wrong, right? The company wanted to regionalize, which I just don't really, it's not a model I believe in. It's not something I operate well in. And so I wasn't the right person for it. And I just kind of like self-selected out and said, look, I would rather not do this anymore. And that was a tough realization, to walk away from like this incredible machine that I'd been building for 4 years, which I still to this day have a tremendous amount of pride in. And then I was like, you know what? I could have said, hey, I'm a team player. I'll figure it out. I just sort of said, you know what? for what's right for me and what I want to do. I'm like a builder. I like to be there early. I feel like I've made my mark here. I think I've helped a lot. It's time for me to go figure out my next thing. I walked away from a tremendous amount of equity, and just being able to, having to tell people, it's like, why are you leaving? It's like, and then you question yourself. It's like, wait, is there something wrong with me? You know, it's like rest, invest. That's just like, that was of zero interest to me to do that. And like, almost like no amount of money made that okay for me. That's not what I want. I like to work, and I want my work to be fulfilling, and I want to be doing stuff that I'm excited about. And so like I had been there for 4 years. We had done an incredible amount of stuff. The company was going through, a quite amount of change at the time. And so I just decided that it was not the time for me to be there anymore. It was very emotionally taxing and, complicated because I was an executive and I had been part of an acquisition, and there was like very robust agreements in place with things about me leaving and what it meant for other people. And there was like big strategic decisions happening at the company, which I may or may not have been a part of. And so all those things, to like take that into account was really emotionally taxing.
Yeah. Sounds like that was the toughest part of leaving.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you respond to those detractors when they came back to question such a big decision on your part?
Well, it took a long time. I had been thinking about leaving for a year. And I would talk to my wife, my family. I'd talk to my dad, and he'd be like, what's wrong with you? Like, just shut up and go back to work. My wife, not so much. Like, she understood like the impact it was having on our family, me traveling all over the world all the time, working as hard as I was, these late night, Monday night executive meetings. She was more of like, look, no amount of money is worth us like not getting to spend time together as a family. Another factor is that she got pregnant with our second daughter, and I wasn't really able to be that around for our first one. I was like, look, this is time I don't get back in life. And I think a big part of it was like, what would I even do with like the amount of money that I thought I was walking away from? It's like, I'm pretty happy with our life. I don't think I'd change much. And I was developing passions and interests in other things, and I wanted to pursue them. And life's long, careers are long. And I don't know, I didn't want to be one of those people that was miserable at work, who was fortunate to elect out of that, and just like not want the model I wanted to show my kids, not the energy I wanted to bring home, not the sort of anguish I wanted to be having personally around these things. Like, stress was high. And so it's just, I don't need this. Again, that's relative. And it took me a long time to like get to the place of saying, you know what, this isn't for me. So it started with going on paternity leave, which, I don't think it was much expected that an executive would actually take the company's generous 16-week paternity.
Yeah, you set an example there. Mm-hmm.
I thought that was important. So I did that, and kind of with an idea that during that time, like unless some sort of miracle happened, I was probably going to resign. A real psychological hurdle is I thought I was more important than I was. I thought it's like, well, when I leave, like all these things are going to fall apart. Like I'm so critical. I've done so many important things here. And the truth is that businesses and organizations are these incredible self-healing organisms that no one person's that important. They just kept doing what they were doing. And I was like, oh, wow. That was like kind of like a tough pill to swallow, because I thought it's like a weird mental thing. It's like, you're kind of like, well, see, if it struggles, then I was important. And it's about this like self-validation that you're almost like rooting for things to go wrong because it makes you feel good about how important you were. And they didn't miss a beat. I didn't matter, in that sense. Like, yeah, my contributions I think were good, but companies, especially companies that have like a good mission, good objectives, good leadership throughout the strata of the company at that scale, they're able to move on, especially at that stage, but that was a bit sobering. And then once I saw that, I was like, yeah, that's a good sign that it's my time to like go do the next thing.
Yeah, that was really, really deep. And you're right. I haven't thought about it that way at all. Doesn't matter how important you think your contributions are. I like the language that you used to describe an organization. You said they are a self-healing organism. So I was like, that is true.
for me, that was like a big, it's ego and pride and sort of like swallowing that. That was kind of like the toughest part, was like coming to the realization that it would be fine without me. Not that I was doing some kind of altruistic, like, oh, I can walk away and they'll be okay. It's more that like, oh, wait, I don't matter that much.
As much as I thought.
Right. And I think that is kind of like an internal process, at least that I needed to go through. Maybe, just being that I was an executive at the company, I had this, like, I thought I was one of these, like, top people there. And that if I left, it's like, how could they possibly exist without me? I sort of built this narrative, especially like, with my need to like convince myself that as a young executive, I had a right to be there, which all those things still could remain to be true, but I didn't need to be there. I think that for me was really something hard to process, and that I needed to come to terms with that, even after I had chosen to leave. And so like, okay, the truth is I'm not as important as I think I was, and I need to walk away. And also for our identity, right? For me, it was a big part of my identity to be chief growth officer at WeWork, the person responsible for these things, and to sort of like just cut off that part of my identity. It was identity boosting for me. It was something I was proud of. It was something that I felt like raised my social status, and to just like elect out of that was also hard.
Absolutely. Thank you for all that candor and that authentic sharing of emotions that you went through, right? There were a couple of things that you said during this conversation that I think will stay with me. Sometimes it's just a series of failures until you hit that point, right? That was fascinating. You also opened the conversation talking about vulnerability and how vulnerability doesn't have to be a sign of weakness, but unfortunately it is seen as a sign of weakness. And lastly, what you just shared, right? Realizing that any place that you are at, your contribution is not as important as you make it up in your head. So if you do have the agency to save yourself some anguish, then you should make that decision. And yes, it's going to be hard, but you'll get through it. So thank you for such a great conversation. Thank you for being open and honest and really sharing your moments of struggles and setbacks. I really appreciate you being a part of the 7/8.
Awesome. Well, I was super happy to be here. I love to share this stuff. And so I appreciate the opportunity and venue to do it. Thank you.
And that's how the cookie crumbles. It was surprising to hear that someone as successful as Dave, too, had questions of self-doubt at every step of the way. I liked Dave's point of view on success. He framed success as not one event in itself, but rather a series of failures coming together to give success, as failures gives one a chance to iterate and refine. The big aha that I learned from Dave was that in life, many of us think of ourselves, our role, as much bigger than what it truly is. We tend to think of our impact as much more important than any other in the company. In Dave's words, companies are self-healing organisms. They will find a way to continue to carry on with or without you. And lastly, giving up the perception that you are what you do is important. Dave shared how once he decoupled his identity from his work, he was at a much better place to make tough decisions. Thank you for listening to this episode. Do share your thoughts. I am on Twitter @FarmNectar. Until the next conversation. Cheers, everyone.